You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show after our month off. Thank you for joining us. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we create the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. The next way you can walk that path is by joining Waking the Wild Masculine coming this September. It's a potent circle for men to support you in discovering your soul path, expressing your heart's truth, and rising into sovereignty, all whilst being fully seen and held by a circle of your fellow men. It is incredibly powerful, activating magic. Go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM to discover more and to claim your space. And now into this week's show. It's my all the everything where I jam on an eclectic mix of topics. This is where you can get up close and personal with me, get inside my head and see what I've been up to. The making of the show also airs live in our Facebook group on the first Thursday of every month at 5 p.m. UK time. So as well as getting a sneak preview of the episode as I'm creating it, you can also join me beforehand to share what's coming up for you and to ask me questions. So in this episode, I dive deep into the topic chosen by our members of how to succeed in raising sovereigns within modern day parenting. This is a topic that's actually very close to my heart and one I can speak to with lived experience as both a child and as a parent in that dynamic. Sounds good? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to August, all the everything. Thank you for joining me. I usually start with what I've been up to in the last month, what I've been consuming and what I've been creating. I've decided this month not to do that. And in short, it's because I came out of a shamanic initiation ceremony at the weekend and I'm in such a strange space still. I wasn't even sure if I was going to do this show. And so just to show up and actually do the show on the topic that our members voted for was all I could quite manage. And quite honestly, I've not been creating anything in the last week. I certainly created lots last month, but it's actually around creativity that a lot of things have been showing up for me since that initiation. So right now, sharing anything on the topic of what I've been creating just feels off. So for this month, I won't be sharing that and I'll be diving straight into the main show. I've decided, as I think I've been doing probably for about 2 or 3 months now, to make this a little bit more of, I guess, interactive, allow you to engage with it almost as if it's a class, as opposed to just sitting there passively listening. Of course, you're very welcome to sit there passively listening, but you'll certainly get more out of it if you engage in it in a form of inquiry. So that's my intention. And so, yeah, it's your choice whether you want to engage in that way or just sit back and listen. These are questions I've also asked in our Facebook group, and I can share with you some of what our members have been saying too. I'll do that anonymously, but I'll do that after I've asked you the questions. So what I'd suggest is get a pen and paper, and you can capture obviously your answers to these questions, but also anything else that's showing up for you during this show. It might be that you have ideas show up, things that you might want to commit to change. So really worth capturing all those as we go. So go grab a pen and paper. And then I'm going to ask you those first two questions. So do you have a vision for your family, or it could be a vision for your parenting, whichever way that is for you. So do you have a vision for your family? And so that's just a yes or no. And it's absolutely fine if you don't. I'll be explaining why I feel that can be really, really beneficial as we go into this show. But for the moment, just capture, do you have one or not? And if you do have one, what three words capture its energetic? So just three words, just it makes it a bit easier to work with them. And of course, if you already have a vision, there may actually be words that are in your vision. Or if you don't have a vision, it might be that you just want to try and capture what does feel important to you. Or if these are words that perhaps, I don't know, it might be your vision is more in kind of longer sentences. So in which case, just pick three words that you feel most closely really get into the essence of that vision. So just three words. And then I'm going to share with you some of the words that were shared in our Facebook group. So we've got love, respect, and freedom. Love, laughter, and sovereignty. Freedom, choice, and autonomy. Connection, love, and freedom. And one that was just shared, if I remember this rightly, I think it was health, wealth, and togetherness. And my next question to you is just notice the themes that are showing up in your three words. It might be that you recognize that there's a particular focus on certain things that are actually captured in more than one of those words. Often when we have that unconscious focus on something, it means that we'll pick words that are actually quite similar. So of the ones that I just shared with you, you could see that connection and love have a very similar energetic feeling to them. Similar to, you might say, freedom and autonomy have a similar energetics. Just notice, again, with no wrong making, just notice where you have that similar energetic showing up in more than one of the words. And then as we go through the show, I'm not asking you right now to, okay, go off and change this, but you might just notice that because you focused a lot on one particular energetic and it's shown up as in more than one word, it might be that something's actually missing. But I would invite you to go back and have a look at that after the show. It's just really making the point now that you'll notice that when you've got this energetic that's showing up so much, it's because that's really important to you. But is there something else? It's also important. It's just not being captured because your focus has been so much on this other part of it. So that's the starting point of the inquiry questions. So now looking at the way that we parent in this modern world is quite often, particularly if we are on a kind of more conscious path, let's say, is quite often taken from ways that we've been taught to parent externally via experts, books, all manner of things that we're being taught out there. There will, of course, also be that the way that we've been raised, which is kind of like, really installed. And then anything that we want to do to change that often will come again in the form of recognizing, okay, I don't like this part about the way that I was parented. I'm going to look out there for guidance in order to change that part of my parenting. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want to make that clear. But I really want to make that first and foremost, like as a way that we parent in this modern world is kind of strange, because that's what we're doing. We're going outside of our family, outside of our community, to experts, that exist outside of our particular setting in order to get this guidance. And the reason we're doing that is because in this modern world, we are bereft of that community, the context in which parenting would just happen naturally. It would be role modeled to us, experienced by us in a way that was kind of bone deep and wouldn't need us to kind of then be going outside of that for guidance. So this is why we are hungry for all of this expertise, is because it isn't that we are, stupid. It isn't because we are, clueless when it comes to parenting. It's because the context with which we're trying to parent in is absolutely lacking of the ingredients that would allow us to parent really instinctually and really in a context that was suited for. So that's why, and again, no wrong making at all, that we then go out to the experts, but it's really important to recognize that's why we're doing it. It's not because humans need that in order to be able to parent. It's because modern humans living in a modern context need it. That's where, and I suspect most of you listen to this show because of the kind of show that it is. I suspect most of you, if you've gone out looking for parenting methods and strategies, you've probably gone towards more kind of natural parenting philosophies. So I'm a big fan of, for example, the continuum concept. So books and methods like that are really looking at what we know of how humans have parented for most of our time on this planet throughout the world. So these are things that we can still observe if we look at Indigenous people. So that's why it can be really helpful, because it is a return to something that is more natural. But again, it's really worth recognizing that we don't have that context. So it doesn't mean that it has no place. It can actually be really, really helpful to bring us back in touch with our instincts and to allow us to know, actually, wanting to, tend to a crying baby, for example, and the instincts that have us want to do that are actually okay, and we can listen to them. Sometimes it takes hearing it out there, reflected back to us, for us to be able to trust that's okay. And again, recognize we are in a modern context where we are bereft of true community. There's the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Almost all of us lack that village in any true sense. So whilst there is huge amounts that we can learn when we look at things like the continuum concept, it's also worth recognizing we need to look at what serves within our particular family unit, within our community, in this modern setting. And so everything I'm talking about is coming from that sense that we are doing what we can, and this is true for everything we do here at Wake and Wild. We're doing what we can to align ourselves with what's natural, what we know really serves humans, and knowing that unless we are planning to go off and live in an Indigenous way, if that's possible, if we're not going to do that, it's what can we learn from natural ways of doing things and create them within a context that's actually how we are living and how we choose to live. Again, this is very much, about being sovereign. Is we're choosing how we live. We choose the context we live in. We choose the family we have around us, the friends we have around us, the jobs we do, where we live. All of that is how do we then parent within that context that we've chosen to live in, which is going to, again, be very different to what is natural for humans. I'm just going to take a mouthful and a mouthful of water, that is. Okay, so my own parenting philosophy is particularly focused on sovereigns, and to the point where it's actually is included. Sorry, dog's barking. to the point where I have the word sovereign included in my vision for my family. It's particularly important to me for a number of reasons. And I can think back now that a large part of that is because that's how I was parented. It's certainly not something I realized for most of my life. Actually, it's something that as time's gone on, as I've done this work, as I've become a parent myself, I've actually realized how much that was actually part of my own childhood and has benefited me and has given me, I guess, a real head start when it comes to my own sovereignty. And so that's something that I really want to share with you so you understand this isn't something that I just think is a good idea or have read in a book and then I'm kind of trying out myself. This is actually, I'd say, fairly rare in that this is how I was parented to a large extent myself. And, you know, are there areas that I would parent differently to how I was parented? Absolutely. But fundamentally, this focus on sovereignty is something that, as far as I can see, is incredibly beneficial and is certainly something that I hold as one of the most important aspects of when I'm parenting our children. So I've shared some of my childhood before, but talking specifically through this lens of sovereignty, the key thing that really, really stands out, and this is something I'm going to talk more about in a moment. My father, I was raised by a single father, so it's primarily my father I'm going to speak about. My father was himself incredibly sovereign. My father himself was incredibly sovereign. And the reason that's important is when it comes to parenting, who we're being, what we're role modeling, how we're behaving is one of the most important ingredients in terms of how our children, what they'll learn is important, what they'll learn is safe, what they'll learn is something that may be useful for them. So that's the thing that really stands out for me, that I can give you examples, and I probably will, of ways that my father parented me for me to be sovereign. But first and foremost, he was sovereign himself. He lived from sovereignty himself. So that's what I saw modeled. And again, as I spoke about in last week's show, as sovereigns, we're only available to treat other people as sovereigns. So from that place of him having his own, he wouldn't have perhaps worded it like that, but from the place of him having that commitment to sovereignty, he was only available to treat me as sovereign. Again, when I spoke last month about sovereignty, and if you haven't listened to that one, it's definitely worth listening to that one too. But if you see that we can either be on that victim triangle where we're responding to people from either victim, persecutor, or rescuer, or we can be responding to ourselves, the world, other people from sovereignty, that applies just as much when it comes to children. If we are sovereign ourselves, it doesn't then make sense to drop onto the victim triangle when we're in response to children. So that's the first thing that has to be crystal clear here. It's only possible to parent from sovereignty, from sovereign as ourselves, from sovereignty ourselves. So for my father, that showed up in a really clear alignment of what was for him, the way that he lived his life, in all sorts of ways. We traveled for large parts of my childhood. And that at the time wasn't seen as something necessarily that was, I guess, the right thing to do, especially with a 7-year-old girl. And we were doing all sorts, camping out under the stars, hitchhiking, sometimes staying in squats and communes. I mean, all sorts of things that I'm sure he had people saying wasn't a responsible way to live. for him, it felt deeply in alignment and he was sovereign and therefore he chose it anyway. It also showed up in terms of choices he made about the work he did. He ended up doing all sorts of things during my childhood, including having his own business, creating computer games. He was a maths and physics teacher. He worked as a estimator. I mean, you name it, he did different things. And again, always what was in alignment for him that allowed him, I guess, the combination of a lifestyle and creative expression that was right for him. So I could go on, but I just want to just share with you, there was this just absolute clear commitment to sovereignty and living in a way that was in alignment for him that showed up in all the different ways of our lives. In terms of how he then treated me as sovereign, so it's actually harder to think of examples where that wasn't the case. I'm just trying to, it was so the water I swam in. I'm actually struggling to think of something that would be perhaps present in other people's upbringing that wasn't present in mine. So I suppose as an example, I was absolutely allowed to wear, look, be exactly as I was. There was no sense of kind of dress in this way, brush my hair or have my hair a certain way. I mean, I was very, very, very much a tomboy growing up, to the point where I was mistaken for a boy. I had no interest in sort of, pretty dress. I mean, absolute opposite to how I'm now, but, like the idea of wearing something like floral and pretty was just like, are you kidding me? A lot of the time I just had cropped hair, often that I cut myself. I mean, I looked an absolute mess. And there was no sense that that wasn't okay with him. It was just, if that was felt good to me, that was completely okay for him. I'm trying to think of some other thing. Again, in terms of, so we did some quite, I'd say, risky things, particularly when we're traveling, but I guess anyway. And there was very much a sense of, and this was actually mirrored, it's being really mirrored in my shamanic training at the moment. I shared this in the last shamanic download. There was a real sense of him seeing my power. So it was never a sense of I had to do whatever this thing was that was a bit risky or scary. But there was very much a kind of calling me into my power. Like, this is the thing that we're about to do. There's one particular memory I've got of us walking around the side of this cliff, really high up above the waves on a beach in Ibiza, quite a small ledge. And I was really scared to do it. And it wasn't like I could have chosen not to do it. Ultimately, he would have come back. We were walking sort of around this cliff that was sticking out and then going back to the other side. So if I said, I don't want to do it, I'm too scared, that would have been okay. But there was a real sense in him, and I'm guessing he kind of, weighed up the real risk level, decided actually it was something I was capable of. And so it was a real invitation into finding my power in order to be able to meet this challenge, which is what I did do, and I was capable of it. So this seeing me as sovereign showed up in many different ways, this absolute freedom, but also, again, a real sense of seeing my power. The other parts of this, and again, this is so important for sovereignty, and it is so important to what we are then showing to our children, role modeling to our children, is this leadership, which starts with self. Ultimately, sovereignty can be seen as self-leadership, but it's this recognizing that if something's in alignment for us, we will live that and express it in a way that is calling other people into aligning with that, if that is what's right for them. And so as adults, that could show up in how we parent our children, as in, like, this is the life that I've created that is in alignment for me. And I'm the parent. And so at the moment, I am I guess, the leader in this situation. So you have sovereignty within it. And this is the context it's happening in. Same, for example, if we are, I guess, a leader in a work context. So everyone's sovereign within it. And as someone who holds that position of leader, we are calling everyone into sovereignty within that context that has been created. And so, again, whilst I had so much freedom, there were clear values that my father had that he was leading me to be in alignment with. Let me just have a think of an example here. So honesty was a big one for him. Honesty, and again, particularly with children, was something that he saw as a really important value, and would both model that in terms of the level of honesty he spoke to me, but it was something that was a value that was clear within our family that I was being guided to align with. And this is a really important part of this. Often what's lacking in many natural parenting methods and strategies is this sense of leadership. So on the one hand, there is like all of this, again, none of this is in any way like negative or disparaging of these kind of strategies. They have this beautiful focus on love and connection, beautiful focus on autonomy and freedom. What can be lacking is this sense of, and leadership and guidance is needed. And again, we look at true natural parenting that happens in Indigenous cultures, of course, all of the members of that community, and particularly children, will have this model that has been shown as has worked for that particular group of people for, however many generations back, and is this kind of blueprint that's being passed down. This is what works for our family, for our community, in this particular setting. And the setting could be all sorts of things, including where it is in the world, what natural resources are around. And so within that, there is this leadership required to live in a way that's in alignment with that. So that's a really important part of this. If we aren't stepping into that sovereign leadership as parents, we're missing a really important piece that allows those natural parenting methods, which again are beautiful, to really work in the way that we are, I guess, choosing, because we feel that they'll work much better than less connected forms of parenting. Okay, let me now have another mouthful of water. Okay, so coming back to the role modeling. This is something that is so obvious, and yet is one of the things I think we miss most as parents. And there's a Jung quote that I often share with parents that kind of like, particularly with mothers, kind of like has this like, oh, feeling on us, me included, just to be clear. And the quote goes, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents." I'm going to say that again. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. And the reason that kind of is like, oh, is because if we're parents who really, really want our children to do well, our children to thrive, our children to live in alignment with those, whatever those three words that capture the energetic of our vision, if we're not actually living that kind of a life ourselves, that will have this negative effect. It won't create what we're wanting to, because we're creating this burden that the child must then bear. And So again, it's the role modeling isn't just about our child. I mean, it's a complex one because it's all so intertwined, but it isn't just about our child being able to see us and go, oh, okay, that's how to live. It's also because they're looking to us to see us as being these examples of whole, healthy, thriving, expressed humans. And if that's not what's happening, there's a kind of a blame that almost like gets, I mean, in the worst case examples, and I've had clients share with me where parents have literally said, you know, I had to stay in this unhappy marriage because of you, or I could never go and do whatever the thing was because of you. So, worst case scenario is actually said, but even if it's not said, that sense that my parent only lived half their life, half a life, you know, half of their potential, half of their dreams because of me, one way or another, a child will feel that. So, this is again a really important part. It's partly about role modeling, but it's also this sense that the last thing we want is for our child to bear this sense that us not living is because of them. So, again, this parenting for sovereignty has to come from our own commitment to living fully ourselves. So part of that is sovereign. Part of that is, and we word it this way in our work with Wake the Wild, but there's other ways of seeing this. We talk about being open-hearted and soul-led. Ultimately, living life as a celebration of your soul. What did you come here to do? Well, how did you come here to experience yourself, life, other people? It's from that deep, deep commitment to how you are living that you will also parent. These things aren't separate. I remember I had a realization about 5 years ago or so, I'd say, where until then, I'd very much had this sense of, it was like a kind of noble sacrifice was the way I had it set up. I can either be a good mother and really present for my children, or I can be kind of like really expressed and creative and creating an amazing business, which is kind of like having a beneficial effect on the world. It's one or the other. That's how I had it set up. And so it was a real no-win situation, because when I was really focused on being a parent, being present, doing things for my children, I don't know, taking time off during the holidays so that I could be with them, I was feeling this sense of guilt, but also, I guess, a resentment for what I wasn't able to do. And conversely, when I was really throwing myself into my work and wasn't able to spend time with my children, I'd feel the reverse of that. So this was something that I spent a lot of time working through with my coach at the time. You know, how do I get this balance? How do I not feel the guilt here? And then there was, and what I'm about to say is going to sound like this kind of like, oh, here's the answer. And it wasn't. This was a much deeper shift that took place. There was a point where I realized there isn't a choice here. This isn't a kind of, I do this at the cost of this, or I do this at the cost of this. These are just all expressions of my soul. And the more I'm living in alignment with my soul, the more it will just naturally show up in the ways that it needs to moment, whether that being with my children, whether that be doing something for work or anything else. And that's really the invitation I'm making to you here. Whatever form that comes in for you, whatever work you choose to do to create that sense of really living from soul, that is what's required in order for you to have that life that's fully lived versus the unlived life that Jung spoke about. Okay, how am I doing for time? Oh, this has flown by. Okay, so I'm going to jump into some, I'm hoping quite practical questions that I've had in the Facebook group, and talk directly to some answers. Some of them I think will have probably been answered already just in terms of what I've shared, but I will read each of them And then if there's anything particular I think is worth adding, I'll do that then. So the first question is, there were lots of posts and media attention of Simone Biles for exiting the Olympic gymnastics competition. Could you speak to how we support children to deal with the sovereign price, please? Love that question. And so what's being talked about with that sovereign price is something that I've spoken about quite a lot before. And it's this idea of sometimes we need to make a choice, and we can either pay the victim price, which means we're going to carry on doing something knowing it's not in alignment for us. And for whatever reason, we still choose that. So the victim price we're choosing is whatever that means for that thing to not being in alignment for us. Or we pay the sovereign price, which means we choose what's in alignment for us, but it might come at a cost of some other kind. So a typical one might be we choose to do something that we know our loved ones aren't going to like. So it will feel great that we're making a choice in alignment, and we're going to have to pay the price of them not approving of us or them feeling upset with us. So that's an example of what we're talking about here. We're saying the sovereign price. And it's actually one of the things I'd say that adults I work with find, I think the idea of this sovereign price is fairly easy to grasp. Choosing to pay the sovereign price isn't so much. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that most people aren't raised to be sovereign, and therefore most people are going to be compelled to pay the victim price without even really having a conscious thought about it. It'll be something that just, oh, of course I'm going to do the thing that gets me approval. And so it will take quite a lot for them to actually be willing to pay that price and do something in alignment. So it's, again, very, very challenging for most adults to do. And it becomes much easier. Of course, if you're an adult now, that's something that you can get support to be able to do. That's what our work's all about. But of course, again, going directly to this question, if we are raising our children with this understanding of their sovereignty and supporting them in making aligned choices for them, it's going to be so much easier for them as adults. So the great thing is life will be providing them with material for liberation and opportunities to make sovereign choices from a pretty early age. And so if we are able to be with them, helping them illuminate what that cost is, what the price is going to be, and allow them to know, ultimately, no matter what, you're going to love them, you're going to be with them. It really does help them start to make those choices. And it may be, again, they still choose to pay the price. It may be that you don't use this language with them when they're children, but it might be that they do choose to do the thing that's not really in alignment, but just again, knowing they're doing it. I often say to our students and clients, even choosing to pay the victim price, but doing so in full knowledge of that's what you're choosing and why, is sovereign. And so similarly, the more awareness we can bring to these things, as more awareness our children can bring to those choices, the better, the more they'll be in their power. So an example of that might be, I'm sure this is one that showed up a lot for many other parents too, is there's been times where my children have had homework and haven't wanted to do it. And because, again, we're very much raising them with this sovereign autonomy, I would never say to them, you must do the homework. What I would do is help them illuminate, okay, so by not doing the homework, what would be the potential price to pay? And that could include all sorts of things. It might just include the teacher having a go at them. It could, I guess, maybe include being kept in at lunchtime. It's going to be a number of different things that potentially could happen. And is that something you choose? And they have that choice. And sometimes they've chosen that, sometimes they haven't chosen that. And it's clear I don't have a sense of my own view of what's right or wrong. I'm supporting them by me saying what your choice is, if it's an alignment for you, or even again, if it's not an alignment for you, but you choose it anyway because you don't want to pay the price, so be it. We've had similar conversations about all sorts of things like uniform. I don't know, doing things, I don't know, that may, for example, make another family member happy, all sorts of opportunities to decide whether to pay the sovereign price will be showing up for them. So that, in short, is our role as parents, showing them it is possible for them to make these choices, even when they come at a price, if that does feel right for them. And then the other question, sort of second part to this, is thinking of the abuse that Simone experienced by a medical coach as a child. Is there a way of helping children trust what's right for them when an older and authoritative influence is doing or saying the opposite? So I will say, first and foremost, I don't at all consume any news whatsoever. So literally all I know is pretty much what's been said already in these questions. I have no idea about the backdrop to this story or anything else. So I really want to make that clear. Maybe I say things that aren't wholly relevant in this particular situation. That would be because I'm answering it based on literally what's written here and making my own kind of like guessing what this is about. So I'm going to speak to it in a bit more a broader way, because again, what I'm saying may not fit this particular example because I don't know it. So this goes back to an extent to what we were just talking about. The more that we are raising our children as sovereign, which includes, again, trusting them to make the choices that serve them and their power. And again, within that family context, within the family values, within that leadership of what we've seen serves, the more they'll be able to do that, even when other people, including those with authority, are telling them otherwise. So you can see how that links already to what I was just sharing about teachers. Even if, sorry, the dog's being naughty, I'm going to try and get someone to let him out. Even if a teacher is telling them to do something, because they have a real sense of their own power, they won't necessarily do it because they've been used to being able to make choices that are alignment for them, even when it may not get them approval. There's another part to this, I think, also, where the more that they are being raised in an environment that is, again, respectful and loving and gives them autonomy, that becomes their norm. Anything that's not that is going to feel off. And that includes, I've had a couple of examples, which I can't say too much about because it is going to kind of get into, I guess, personal family stuff. But there's been a couple of examples where people in our extended family have said things to our children that, let's say, could be seen as a bit manipulative. I mean, it was innocently done, not at all meant from a bad place. It's just how they've been used to parenting and what makes sense to them. Because our children aren't used to being lied to, they're not used to being told a kind of untruth in order to have them behave in a certain way, they know when something like that's off. And they also know it's not them that's the problem. So there's two specific situations that have happened that just come to mind now. Both times, my children recognized that that was not okay and either said directly to the person, that's not actually what's happening, why are you saying that? Or came to me and said, this is what's happened. And again, these are quite innocent. None of this was particularly, horrible stuff. It was just, again, very, very different parenting styles, often within, I guess, less natural parenting styles. There is much more of this kind of manipulating, reward, punishment stuff going on. If that's not what your children have been used to, they will know when it's energetically off and will do what they need to, I guess, create a disruption to that pattern. Another important part to this, which again may or may not link directly to the example I've been asked about here, is something we've always said to the children is, if another adult asks you to keep a secret, unless it literally is like a birthday present kind of surprise, please don't keep the secret. That isn't something that feels good to us for children to need to have secrets from our parents. It's not in alignment with our values as a family. And so that simple understanding that we don't have secrets like that does prevent a lot of things happening that otherwise could happen within a context where something's going down that feels off to them, but they've been told not to tell the parent. And of the two examples I just told you about where things were kind of felt off to my children, the second example that actually had been asked to keep it as a secret, and again, because they knew that wasn't in line with our values, they didn't keep it a secret. Okay, I hope that makes sense within, again, I'm being intentionally vague because I don't want to sort of, share things that don't feel okay to share, but hopefully it was clear enough to make sense. Okay, next question. My 6-year-olds will deny doing something they perceive they'll be in trouble for, and in trouble equals it being explained what they did was not helpful and seeing what it's resulted in. Why do children opt for not owning up to breaking things, etc.? How do you build a safe environment for them to feel able to be honest? Do children have a built-in, I won't be loved if? Is there a way to change that belief so all behaviour is welcome? And then seeing why some behaviours don't serve us as well. Sorry, the dog's back at the blooming door. Okay, so what's occurring to me with this is I think so much of this goes back again to role modelling, as in, of course, the way that we are treating children, for example, when something's gone wrong and then being honest about it, of course, that is going to play a part. But again, the role modelling is the part that I feel speaks potentially even more loudly. So in short, how our children show up is often a reflection of how we show up. And so in this instance, if we notice our children are struggling to own when they've made a mistake and come and share that and potentially, clear up whatever that needs to be cleared up in whatever form, whether that be apologising, clearing up a mess or making amends or anything else, is that something that you struggle with? Do you struggle to own mistakes and clear up the mess in whatever way needs to be cleared up? And if so, is that something you'd like to change? That may seem a really simple lens on it, but I think these things often are that simple. It's if we notice, do you know what? I don't think I've ever shamed my child and they've come to me and told me something's broken. So why are they doing that? The next place to look is what we're role modeling. If both things are kind of like, no, I definitely am completely loving and understanding when they come to me and are honest about having something gone wrong, and is something I'm role modeling to them in a positive way, and yet they still seem to be, reluctant to come and share that with me, then clearly that's going to be something different. But I'd say that's quite rare. I'd say normally one of those two things or both are going to be where the answer lies. So I hope that's helpful. If it isn't, I'm obviously anything that you want to ask after this show, let me know, and I will, one way or another, come back and answer it another time. But I would say typically the answer lies in one of those two places. Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to choose one more question. Apologies, I didn't get to everyone's questions. I may well continue to answer them in the group, so I will keep what I can and again keep questions coming in, and I will answer them probably in the group afterwards. So the last question, a challenge for me is being consistent with how much leadership I'm giving them, getting the right balance of giving them autonomy and having boundaries. And this is a brilliant question, goes right to the heart really of this whole show. So this is, again, when I talked earlier about this, aligning with what's natural includes having a clear sense of our vision for our particular setting, which is why, again, this idea of vision is really helpful. We aren't in, most of us, probably if you listen to the show, this goes for you too, we aren't in a setting that is conducive to parenting in this just really natural, instinctual, effortless, supported way. Very few of us are going to be in that setting. So that's why having a vision as to this is what I am consciously creating as a sovereign, as someone who is living in alignment with what's for me, this is what I'm creating. This is what my family is about. These are the values that I hold dear. It's from there that we are then able to guide them within that. And again, let's not forget, if we were in an Indigenous setting, that particular tribe, village, band of people would absolutely have ways of living that they knew worked for that group of people. Things that people did do, didn't do, things that were taboo, things that, whether, even simple things about where not to go because it's dangerous, where to go and find the best plants to eat. And so if we try to adopt a natural parenting style where we give children lots of autonomy and we're not giving them that leadership, we really are only kind of adopting part of the answer from these parenting styles, which again are very, very natural for humans, but do need to have those other aspects that allow us to create it in this way that works for our modern lives. And again, works for us as powerful creators. So let me just see if there's anything I can add to that. I think the other part of this is where there's a vision that you have for your family, what works for your family within your community, within your setting, but also your own boundaries. What works for you personally? Going back to the Jung quote, the dreaded Jung quote, if it's really important for you to have, for example, I don't know, speaking personally, I need a lot of time to myself. And whether that's time to meditate, whether that's time to go on a walk on my own, whatever it might be. And so part of creating that leadership is also speaking out the places that I need certain things to be a certain way in order for me to live my life fully. So hopefully that all makes sense, but this all again comes from who you are being, how you are creating your life, which then includes how you parent. So thank you so much for all those questions. Really, really good ones. And again, keep them coming. I will answer them one way or another. So some aligned actions I'm going to suggest that you might want to take after listening to this show. Firstly, decide, is sovereignty important to you, having heard everything you've just heard? And if so, devote to it. Devote to it for yourself first and foremost, but again, for your children, but it has to start with you. If you don't already have one, create a vision for your family. And if you have one, perhaps now go back and see where you might want to add things in that weren't already in there that now seem important, which may again include sovereignty. Lastly, this is again sort of flows from the previous two. Model and speak to your children about the power that comes from being sovereign. You may not use the word sovereign. One of the words that is probably one of the most common words I use with my children is the word leader, because that's a word that's often used out there in the world. Having this sense of, true leadership, as in leadership that comes from that deep sense of sovereignty, is open-hearted, is doing things in alignment. This is something the world needs and is deeply beneficial. And so them understanding, not just from a place of you modeling it, but actually speaking about it, talking about what does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be a self-leader? What does it mean to create a vision and then act in alignment with it? That's something that, again, whilst I'm role modeling that constantly, it's also something we talk about a lot. So that, again, is an invitation for you to an aligned action if it does indeed feel aligned. If you want more of all these kinds of things we've just been talking about in this show, there's 2 crucibles we've got coming up that may be in alignment for you, that we've got a few spaces left on each of them. If you're a man, go check out Waking the Wild Masculine, and that's at primalhappiness.co/WTWM. That's a crucible that Jonathan's leading in September for men, all around masculine reclamation, and includes a vision quest. So go check that out if you're feeling it could be for you. Or we've got Wake the Wild Sovereign, which is starting in November. And this is the most intimate way to work with us. It's the only way at present to have one-to-one sessions with myself and Jonathan. And it's all new for November. It's something that we've been running for a number of years now, but this is a brand new evolution of Wake the Wild Sovereign, which now includes a circle. So that's at primalhappiness.co/sovereign, and fairly obvious. If you are feeling called into sovereignty, this would be the crucible for you. It does what it says on the tin. If you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you don't currently listen to our podcast, there is a cornucopia of episodes there for you. That's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. And if you are not already a member of our group, I've referred to it several times. It's a fabulous group, and you get a chance to engage, take part, choose, in fact, what I'm going to be talking about if you're a member of that group. And that's at facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. I did this. I wasn't sure, but I've created something. Let's see what you think of it. I'd love to know. This was certainly felt like a very different episode for me, just because of the space I'm in. So I hope it was helpful. But again, do let me know if you've got any questions or feedback for me. Thank you so much for joining me. I love you. Goodbye. So that's all for this month. I'd love to know what you took from this show. Are you feeling called to devote to parenting for sovereignty? And if so, what are the aligned actions you're going to take? If you'd like to share what came up for you when listening to this show, then the Primal Happiness Facebook group is a wonderful place to do just that. And the link for that is facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. And this is perfect timing because you can join me also for the live making of the next show. It's on Thursday, the 2nd of September at 5 p.m. UK time. And as well as getting a sneak preview of the episode as I'm creating it, you can also join me beforehand to share what's coming up for you, ask me questions, which I'll either answer there and then, or I will include in the show itself. This show is going to be about something like discover the real cause and the hidden gifts in anxiety. So if anxiety is something that's present in your life, this will be a show you won't want to miss. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 333. Beautifully magical number. If you don't want to miss our next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode straight to your device auto-magically as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.